Traveller, imagine a single footprint pressed into ancient ash, already cooling beneath a sky no human eyes had ever seen. You didn't arrive at this moment by accident. The universe has a way of guiding curious minds to questions that refuse to stay buried, questions that wait patiently for the right silence to be heard. What if Earth's first civilization wasn't human at all, but something older, shaped by epochs we no longer recognize? Our planet is more than 4.5 billion years old, and nearly all of that story unfolded long before us. Entire worlds of life rose adapted and vanished, leaving behind only faint geological whispers. Somewhere in those forgotten layers, patterns may have repeated. Intelligence flickering, organizing, dreaming and disappearing, again like a shadow moving across deep time. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. A pale horizon forms beneath an unfamiliar sky, and the land exhales, heat it has been holding for millions of years. Somewhere between night and morning, the ground remembers a weight it no longer carries. Traveller, you're not here by accident. You have arrived at this quiet edge because some questions only surface when the world slows enough to hear them. I remember nights like this from my own work. Long hours alone with instruments humming softly, screens glowing like distant stars maps spread across a desk dusted with time. The data never shouted, it waited, and slowly, patiently it asked to be seen. That is how this story begins, not with certainty, but with attention. What if Earth's first civilization was not human? Not an empire of stone and fire, not cities shaped like our own reflections, but something older adapted to a world that no longer exists. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Human history occupies only the thinnest layer, a breath on the surface of deep time. Before us stretched oceans under different moons, skies with altered chemistry, continents still learning their shapes. Intelligence did not begin with us. It merely passed through. Gravity remembers everything. It holds continents together and pulls ruins back into dust. Erosion is time thinking slowly, endlessly, wearing meaning into stone, and then wearing it away again. If something rose long before us, gravity would have welcomed it, and time would have eventually folded it back into silence. Tonight the universe whispers again. We're trained to search for evidence that looks like us. Straight lines, right angles, tools shaped for hands we recognize. But intelligence does not require resemblance. It requires pattern and memory cooperation. In our own world, we already see echoes, octopus minds that solve puzzles, corvids that plan days ahead, whales that carry songs across generations. These are not rehearsals. They are parallel paths. Imagine a civilization that never needed fire, that worked with pressure and current, with chemistry and resonance. Imagine structures grown rather than built, aligned not to cardinal directions, but to magnetic breath, to tides, to cycles of light invisible to our eyes. If such a culture existed, its ruins would not announce themselves. They would dissolve quietly, becoming geology. I used to think absence was an answer. Now I know it is only a condition. The fossil record is full of gaps that once seemed impossible. Creatures with no ancestors, extinctions without clear causes, sudden blooms of complexity after long quiet stretches. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the universe thinking. Consider this simple fact. Over 99% of all species that ever lived on Earth are extinct. Entire worlds have come and gone erased not by intention, but by inevitability. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Asteroids struck with energies equal to billions of nuclear explosions. Volcanoes rewrote atmospheres. Each time the planet reset, not cleanly but selectively. A civilization caught in such a reset would not leave monuments. It would leave echoes, chemical signatures. Isotopes shifted just enough to raise questions. A thin layer where carbon ratios briefly misbehave. A moment where pollen disappears and metals spike together as if land was cleared and reshaped all at once. Radiation as a whisper. Light as an ancient intelligence passing briefly through matter. These are the things that keep scientists awake at night. Not answers, but correlations. Patterns that do not belong to the background rhythm. I've stared at graphs where the line bends just slightly, where the error bars cannot explain everything. In those moments, the room feels very small and time feels impossibly large. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. If an early civilization lived gently and balanced, drawing energy without combustion, recycling everything it touched, then its signature would be faint, almost polite. The planet would have swallowed it easily. A culture like that would vanish, not in catastrophe, but in blending its legacy diffused into soil, sea, and genome. And yet even blending leaves a trace. Dust is leftover chronology. Every grain carries a story compressed incomplete. Somewhere beneath our feet, under cities and forests and oceans, lie layers we have not learned how to read yet. Libraries written in chemistry instead of words. As the night deepens, it helps to release the need for proof. This is not a trial. It is a meditation on possibility. If something came before us, it does not diminish us. It places us in a longer pattern, a repeating emergence of awareness, followed by forgetting, followed by emergence again. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Pause here, breathe. When you're ready, we'll look for evidence together. A long cylinder of rock rests beneath cold laboratory light, its surface marked with dates older than memory. This is how evidence usually appears, not as revelation, but as patience made solid. Listener, when we speak of proof in deep time, we are not looking for cities frozen in place. We are reading what the planet chose to keep when everything else was allowed to fade. I remember running my fingers along sediment maps late at night, the paper soft with age, corners curled dust settling into the creases. Each layer told a story without words. Oceans advancing, forests, retreating ice, tightening its grip and then loosening again. Evidence in geology is never dramatic. It is cumulative. It builds the way sleep does slowly until resistance gives way. If an ancient civilization had existed millions of years ago, its most durable traces would not be walls or tools. Those are fragile things on geological scales. Stone cracks, metal dissolves, concrete returns to mineral memory. What lasts is chemistry, the quiet rearrangement of elements that does not belong to natural cycles alone. Consider carbon, the storyteller of life. Its isotopes drift in predictable rhythms as plants grow, die, and are buried. But industrial-scale activity bends that rhythm. Fossil fuel combustion shifts ratios in a way volcanoes rarely do. Large-scale agriculture leaves pollen gaps where forest once stood. Mining concentrates metals in sediments that would otherwise remain diffuse. These changes are subtle, but they are legible to those who know how to listen. In human history, this signal is already visible. A thin layer marking the Anthropocene is forming, even now rich in plastics, fly ash, altered nitrogen cycles, and synthetic compounds unknown to nature before us. This layer will endure long after our cities collapse. It will not describe who we were, only that we were here, and that we changed the rules briefly. Now imagine a similar layer buried far deeper, compressed by millions of years of pressure. Not thick, not obvious, just anomalous enough to resist easy explanation. A spike in metals without a matching volcanic signature. A sudden shift in carbon isotopes without an extinction event to justify it. Evidence rarely arrives alone. It travels in clusters. This is where science grows cautious. The Earth has many ways to surprise us without intelligence being involved. Flood basalts can mimic industrial emissions. Asteroid impacts can redistribute elements violently. Microbes can rewrite chemistry in ways that look intentional, but are not. Evidence must be contextual. It must repeat across sites, across cores, across continents. And yet there are moments when repetition itself becomes unsettling. Similar anomalies appearing in layers of the same age across distant regions. Patterns that suggest coordination rather than coincidence. These are not conclusions, they are invitations. Gravity as memory pulling related signals together across space and time. In my own work, the most unsettling data points were never the dramatic ones. They were the small discrepancies that refused to go away. Values just outside error margins. Trends that reappeared after recalibration. When that happens, you stop asking what went wrong, and start asking what you don't yet understand. The search for ancient evidence also forces us to confront bias. We expect intelligence to look like infrastructure, roads, grids, monuments. But those are solutions shaped by our biology and our environment. A non-human civilization might optimize for stability rather than expansion. It might build with living systems that leave no lasting scars. Its energy sources might leave no ash, no smoke, no isotopic fingerprint we recognize. Such a civilization would be nearly invisible to us. Its success would be its erasure. Balanced systems dissolve into baseline patterns indistinguishable from nature itself. Silence in this case would not be failure, it would be mastery. This is why absence cannot be treated as disproof. The geological record is incomplete by design. Tectonic plates recycle crust every few 100 million years. Ocean floors, where evidence might best preserve, are the youngest surfaces on the planet. What we have access to is biased toward survival, not truth. Still, some environments remember better than others. Deep ocean sediments accumulate slowly and steadily. Ice cores lock atmospheric chemistry in frozen sequence. Ancient lake beds preserve pollen like a quiet archive. If something unusual happened, these are the places it would whisper from. Imagine a researcher lowering a core through kilometers of water, retrieving mud older than mammals. Imagine finding within it a faint chemical pattern that does not repeat before or after. A momentary disturbance, not violent enough to cause mass extinction, not small enough to be ignored, just enough to suggest activity. This is where speculation begins, but it is disciplined speculation. Scientists call it a thought experiment. If such a signal existed, what would it mean? Could it be natural? Could it be unique? Could it align with other changes? Evidence gains weight when stories converge. I think often of how little of our own civilization would survive without context. Our greatest achievements reduced to chemical traces and broken fragments. Would future minds understand us from that? Or would they argue as we do now about coincidence and chance? Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. There is a humility that comes with this work. You learn to live comfortably with uncertainty. You learn that knowledge has edges, and those edges are not failures. They are boundaries that define what questions are worth asking next. Evidence in deep time is never about certainty. It is about plausibility. As night settles in, let the idea rest gently. Somewhere beneath layers of stone and silence, the earth may be holding a memory it has not yet been asked to share. Or it may be holding nothing at all. Both possibilities are profound. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Tonight the universe whispers again. A single line on a graph bends where it should remain smooth, like a quiet hesitation in the planet's voice. An anomaly rarely announces itself. It waits subtle and patient, asking to be noticed only by those willing to sit with uncertainty. Observer, this is where the story grows quiet and strange, where evidence stops behaving and meaning begins to blur. I remember the first time I encountered an anomaly that refused to disappear. It was late, well past the hour when reasonable explanations usually arrive. The laboratory was dim except for the glow of a monitor, and outside the world had narrowed to rain and darkness. I recalibrated, reran the model, adjusted the assumptions. The anomaly remained. Not dramatic, just persistent. In science, anomalies are dangerous companions. Most of them dissolve under scrutiny, revealing measurement error, contamination, or incomplete data. We are trained to distrust them, to assume the fault lies with us rather than with the universe. And usually we are right, but sometimes, very rarely, an anomaly survives every attempt to erase it. That is when it becomes something else. A question. If an ancient non-human civilization ever existed, anomalies would be its most likely signature. Not artifacts shaped like intention, but disturbances in patterns that otherwise flow smoothly across deep time. A sudden enrichment of certain metals without corresponding volcanic activity. A brief but global shift in carbon isotopes without the biological devastation that normally accompanies it. A mismatch between cause and effect. These are the moments that draw quiet circles around themselves in the data. They do not prove anything. They simply refuse to fit. Earth's history is full of sharp disruptions. Asteroids strike. Supervolcanoes erupt. Magnetic fields flip, oceans drain and refill. Each of these leaves a recognizable fingerprint. We know what catastrophe looks like. We know its rhythms. An anomaly becomes unsettling when it mimics intention without matching destruction. Imagine a layer of sediment where heavy metals appear suddenly then fade. Not enough to poison ecosystems permanently, not enough to trigger mass extinction, just enough to suggest extraction-concentration movement. Imagine this layer appearing across multiple basins separated by ancient oceans, all dated to the same narrow window of time. The mind resists such symmetry. Anomalies challenge our definitions. We want intelligence to be loud, transformative, obvious. But what if intelligence at least once learned restraint? What if its greatest achievement was stability? A civilization that altered its environment only briefly, then disappeared quietly, leaving behind a ripple instead of a scar. In such a case, the anomaly would not be a monument. It would be a pause. There are moments in the geological record that already trouble us in this way. Events that changed climate without clear triggers. Chemical excursions that rise and fall too quickly to match known mechanisms. Layers where expected biological responses are absent. These are usually explained eventually. But explanation does not erase the feeling they leave behind. I have seen scientists grow uncomfortable around such data, not afraid, just unsettled. Because anomalies remind us that our models are not the planet. They are approximations, useful, elegant, incomplete. An anomaly is where humility enters. The danger, of course, is imagination. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We connect dots even when none exist. This is why the idea of a pre-human civilization must be handled carefully. An anomaly does not imply intelligence. It invites investigation, nothing more. To leap beyond that is to turn curiosity into belief, and belief closes questions. Still, it is worth asking what kinds of anomalies intelligence might produce if it were not human. A society that relied on biology rather than metallurgy might leave biochemical traces instead of tools. Altered distributions of certain compounds, genetic bottlenecks that do not align with climate stress, shifts in ecosystem structure without corresponding environmental drivers. Life leaves fingerprints even when it builds nothing durable. Coral reefs change coastlines. Cyanobacteria transform the atmosphere itself. If intelligence ever learned to guide such forces deliberately, even briefly, its signature might be written into life rather than stone. Radiation can also be a whisper. Not the scream of nuclear catastrophe, but the faint residue of processes that concentrated energy in unusual ways. Certain isotopic ratios persist far longer than structures. They drift slowly like afterimages across millions of years. To us they look like noise unless we know how to listen. This is where anomaly becomes poetry. Not because it is mystical, but because it resists closure. It keeps multiple interpretations alive at once, natural but rare, artificial but subtle, coincidental or coordinated. Each explanation coexists uneasily. I sometimes imagine future researchers studying our own time with no knowledge of us. They would see a thin layer rich in strange polymers, altered isotopes, scattered radiation signatures. They might argue endlessly about volcanic mechanisms, microbial processes, unknown natural cycles. Only with enough converging clues would intelligence become plausible. We are learning slowly how fragile inference is. Anomalies also remind us that time is not evenly preserved. Some eras are overrepresented simply because they survived tectonic recycling. Others are nearly erased. A civilization existing in the wrong place at the wrong time could vanish without a trace, more obvious than a misbehaving graph. That thought carries a quiet weight. It suggests that intelligence does not guarantee memory, that being complex does not ensure being remembered. The planet does not archive fairly. It keeps what survives, not what mattered. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Not physically, perhaps, but statistically. As a possibility space. As a question that remains open not because it is likely, but because it is not impossible. The universe does not require us to be unique. It only requires conditions to align, and alignment happens more than once. An anomaly is a place where alignment might have occurred. As the night deepens, allow yourself to sit with that uncertainty. No conclusions are demanded, no belief is required, only attention. The willingness to notice when patterns falter, when explanations strain, when silence thickens around a delta point. In those moments, science and wonder briefly overlap, not in conflict, but in quiet agreement that reality is larger than our current understanding. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking. Rest here, observer. When you are ready, we will listen to the silence itself. A vast plain stretches beneath a sky without names, the wind moving slowly across stone that has forgotten every footstep. Silence is not the absence of sound here. It is presence without voice, a depth that listens back. Traveller, this is the stage where questions no longer push forward but settle, where the universe seems to pause as if considering whether to speak. Silence is often misunderstood in science. We treat it as a gap to be filled, a failure of data, an empty cell in a table waiting for numbers. But in deep time, silence is information. It tells us what did not survive, what was erased gently rather than violently. It tells us where the planet chose to turn the page without leaving a margin note. I learned this not from instruments, but from long nights when nothing happened. Telescopes pointed at quiet skies, sensors returning flat lines, sediment cores that looked ordinary all the way down. At first it feels disappointing, then slowly it feels honest. The universe is under no obligation to entertain us. If a pre-human civilization existed, silence would be its most faithful companion. Not dramatic ruins or warning markers, but the quiet that follows completion. A culture that ended not in collapse but in dissolution would leave behind a world that looks almost unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had ever occurred. Think of how quickly our own traces fade when we step away. A path through grass disappears in days. A campsite returns to forest in seasons. Even cities, when abandoned, soften, crack and sink back into the terrain. Scale that process to millions of years, and the difference between existence and non-existence narrows to nearly nothing. Silence is erosion doing its work without urgency. It is time thinking, slowly grinding memory into background. Rivers do not remember bridges. Mountains do not recall tunnels. The earth absorbs stories the way soil absorbs rain evenly without distinction. There is something unsettling about that neutrality. We want the planet to care to mark intelligence as special. But geology does not rank significance. It only responds to pressure, heat, chemistry, motion. Intelligence, if it once existed before us, would have been treated no differently than a forest or a reef. This realization brings a strange calm. It removes the drama. If there were others, they were not punished. They were not erased as a lesson. They simply passed through a phase of the planet's long breathing. Rise, complexity, return. Silence also forces us to confront our own expectations. We look for noise because noise reassures us that something happened. But some of the most profound processes in nature are quiet. Continental drift moves at the speed fingernails grow. Evolution reshapes entire biospheres without sound. Stars burn steadily for billions of years before fading almost unnoticed. Why should civilization be any louder? A non-human civilization might have valued silence deliberately. Communication systems based on subtle signals. Coordination through chemical gradients. Electromagnetic sensitivity shared rhythms rather than speech. Such a culture would leave no inscriptions, no archives. Its memory would exist only while it lived. When it ended, silence would resume seamlessly. There is also the possibility that silence is not emptiness but disguise. Patterns so deeply integrated into natural cycles that we no longer distinguish them as artificial. Altered ecosystems that stabilize so well they appear untouched. Genetic changes that spread quietly indistinguishable from evolution's own experiments. In this sense, silence could be the greatest success. To act without leaving scars. To build without announcing. To disappear without collapse. As a scientist, this idea is uncomfortable. It removes the hope of discovery. It suggests that some truths are unrecoverable not because we lack tools, but because the world has already blended them beyond separation. No amount of technology can extract intention from equilibrium. and yet there is peace in that. Not every story needs an audience. I have stood in archives where shelves held centuries of records and felt overwhelmed by how much survives. Then I have stood in deserts where entire cultures vanished without trace and felt the opposite. Silence equalizes everything eventually. It reminds us that memory is a temporary privilege. When we imagine a lost civilization before humanity, silence protects it from misuse. Without evidence, it cannot be claimed weaponized or simplified. It remains possibility rather than narrative. A question rather than an answer. Silence also mirrors the night sky. Between stars is not nothing. It is structure on scales too vast for intuition. Dark matter shaping galaxies. Background radiation whispering of beginnings. Absence carrying form. In the same way, the absence of ruins does not imply absence of meaning. It implies a kind of completion beyond our reach. A chapter closed so thoroughly that only the binding remains. This is where myth and science briefly touch. Myths often speak of ages before memory, golden eras without records, beings who left no names behind. Science usually dismisses these as metaphor, but perhaps metaphor is the only language suited to silence. Not to explain it, but to sit beside it. As the night deepens, notice how silence feels in your own body, the slowing breath, the widening space between thoughts. Understanding recedes, but awareness remains. That is the state in which the deepest questions are safest. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Silence is the universe thinking. Rest here, traveller. In the next quiet, we will step into a forgotten epoch. A dim shoreline emerges beneath the sky-tinted copper waves, folding themselves onto stone that has not yet learned our names. This is the forgotten epoch, a span of time so deep, it resists numbers where calendars fail, and memory loosens its grip. Traveller, step gently here, because this age survives only as an impression like warmth lingering after a fire has gone out. In this epoch, the earth wore a different face. Continents leaned closer together, oceans breathed in wider basins, and the air carried a chemistry unfamiliar to modern lungs. Volcanoes stitched the crust with slow fire, and forests rose where deserts would one day form. Nothing about this world anticipated us, and that is its quiet power. Geology remembers this time without commentary. Layers compress minerals, align isotopes, drift toward balance. There is no label that says before humanity, no marker announcing a pause between civilizations. The planet does not segment its history around intelligence. It records pressure, heat motion, and weights. If another civilization lived here, it would have done so under skies that never imagined satellites. The stars were the same, but their patterns were read differently if they were read at all. Perhaps orientation came from tides or magnetic fields from the rhythm of seasons rather than constellations. Knowledge does not require our symbols. I imagine them moving through landscapes that no longer exist. Coastlines now buried under kilometers of sediment. Highlands worn into gentle plains. Rivers rerouted by tectonic patience. Their paths would have been erased even while they walked them, the earth already practicing forgetting. The forgotten epoch teaches humility because it shows how small the window of preservation truly is. Fossils are accidents, records are miracles. Most lives pass without imprint. Entire species rise and fall without leaving a single bone behind their existence, inferred only from gaps and gradients. Science tries to reconstruct this time through fragments, a pollen grain trapped in stone, a ratio shifted slightly off baseline, a temperature curve bending where it should not. These clues are quiet, easily missed, easily misread. They demand patience rather than certainty. In long nights with stratigraphic maps spread across my desk, dust settling on forgotten margins, I feel the weight of this uncertainty. The data does not argue, it does not persuade. It only offers itself incomplete and indifferent, asking whether we are careful enough to listen. A civilization in this epoch would have faced a world less stable than ours. Climate swung more freely. Sea levels rose and fell without warning. Asteroid impacts were closer memories. Survival would have favoured adaptability over permanence, resilience over monument. That kind of intelligence might not have built upward. It might have spread outward, embedded itself into ecosystems, learned to move with change rather than against it. Its structures could have been living grown rather than assembled, dissolving back into soil when abandoned. From our perspective, such a civilization would appear invisible. No quarries, no scars, no debris fields. Oh, only a biosphere slightly rearranged, then rearranged again by time. The signal would blur into noise long before we learned to look. The forgotten epoch is also where resets happen quietly. Not all endings arrive as cataclysms. Some arrive as thresholds crossed too slowly to notice. A cooling trend, a drying basin, a migration that never reverses. Complexity thins, then simplifies. In these transitions, memory dissolves first. Specialized knowledge fades. Long-distance coordination shrinks. What remains is survival without history. A culture does not need to collapse dramatically to disappear. It can simply forget itself. This is difficult for us to accept because we cling to continuity. We archive backup in code. But even now our systems depend on constant care. Remove attention and complexity unravels. The forgotten epoch reminds us that maintenance is as important as invention. There is no tragedy written into this realization. Only rhythm, forests rise, burn return. Reefs bloom, bleach reform. Intelligence may follow similar cycles, flowering briefly, then receding into the background processes of life. When I imagine standing in this epoch, I do not feel fear. I feel distance, the kind that softened urgency. Problems shrink, ambitions lose sharp edges. The world feels vast enough to absorb everything without comment. That vastness is not hostile, it is generous. It allows for endless variation without judgment. It makes room for experiments that fail, and those that succeed, knowing all outcomes eventually converge toward quiet. The forgotten epoch does not ask us to believe in lost civilizations. It asks us to accept that absence is normal, that significance is local, that meaning does not require permanence to be real. As you drift deeper into this age, notice how the idea of before becomes meaningless. There is only during. Processes unfolding without witness. Life learning and unlearning itself in slow motion. If intelligence lived here, it was not waiting to be found. It was complete in its moments, sufficient without legacy. Its value did not depend on our recognition, just as ours will not depend on those who follow. This thought can feel unsettling, but it can also feel freeing. It releases us from the pressure to be eternal. It allows existence to be enough. In the end, Traveller, the forgotten epoch teaches us how to rest inside uncertainty, to let questions remain unanswered without anxiety, to understand that some chapters close so completely that only the universe remembers, and even then only faintly. Tonight the universe whispers again. It does not explain, it does not warn, it simply continues, and that is enough. In laboratories lit only by instrument glow, I sometimes imagine sediment cores as scrolls written by gravity itself. Each layer is a sentence pressed flat, each boundary a pause where conditions change their mind. Reading them is not discovery, but translation, and translation is always partial, always shaped by the listener. The forgotten epoch resists heroes and villains. There are no singular moments to anchor narrative, only gradients and tendencies. Energy flows adjust. Populations respond, feedback loops tighten or loosen. What we call collapse is often just a redistribution of complexity, a thinning that prepares the ground for something quieter. This perspective reframes catastrophe. Extinction is not a failure of life, but a rebalancing of it. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full of potential, of niches, reopening of forms, rehearsing themselves in genetic memory. Even intelligence, if it vanished here, would not be erased from possibility. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, not as an entity, but as a pattern. A preference for organization under certain conditions. A tendency toward awareness when thresholds align. This is not destiny, only probability unfolding patiently. As you settle deeper into sleep, allow this epoch to pass without resolution. Let the unanswered remain gentle. Silence is the universe thinking, and it thinks best when we do not interrupt. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. Rest here, observer, in the long middle where nothing demands conclusion. Breathe with the planet's slow pulse, feel. Time soften its edges and trust that forgetting is not loss but a different kind of keeping. Dreams fade gently, yet patterns endure beyond waking and remembering. Ash drifts slowly through a dim sky, not falling but hovering, as if the planet itself is holding its breath. This is the reset, not a single moment of fire or ice, but a long unwinding where complexity loosens and the world rearranges itself without urgency. Traveller. This is where endings become beginnings without ceremony. Resets rarely announce themselves. They arrive as sequences, pressure building quietly until balance tips. A warming ocean loses oxygen, as a cooling continent locks water into ice. A volcanic province exhales for centuries. None of this feels dramatic from inside the moment. It feels ordinary, even gentle, until it is not. The Earth has reset itself many times. 5 great mass extinctions mark the obvious chapters, but between them are countless smaller erasures. Each one trims the tree of life not randomly, but according to resilience. What survives is not what is strongest, but what fits the new conditions with the least resistance. If a civilization existed before us, this is where it would have faced its reckoning. Not necessarily through sudden annihilation, but through gradual mismatch. Technology is tuned to one climate falter in another. Food webs unravel. Communication networks thin. Knowledge becomes harder to pass on as populations fragment. In human history, we call this decline. From a planetary perspective, it is adjustment. Complexity contracts to reduce energy demand. Systems simplify until they align again with available resources. There is no judgment in this process, only physics and biology negotiating terms. I imagine such a civilization watching the signs with the same mixture of insight and denial we know well. Subtle shifts first, seasonal patterns slipping out of phase, familiar species behaving strangely, instruments recording numbers that drift just beyond expected margins. Nothing urgent enough to abandon everything until suddenly it is. Reset does not mean forgetting instantly. It means memory becomes expensive. Long chains of information require stability to survive. When conditions fluctuate too quickly, those chains snap. Skills once common become rare. Stories shorten. History compresses into myth, then into instinct. The Earth assists this forgetting. Erosion smooths landmarks. Sediment buries infrastructure. Chemical reactions erase sharp boundaries. Radiation quietly randomizes stored information. Time works not as a destroyer, but as an editor cutting away detail, until only broad themes remain. There is a strange mercy in this. A civilization does not have to watch its entire legacy burn. Much of it simply dissolves back into the processes that allowed it to exist in the first place. Metals return to ore. Structures return to dust. Landscapes soften their scars. In my quieter moments staring at climate graphs late at night, I sense how thin the line really is. Our own systems hum with complexity that feels permanent only because it has not yet been tested beyond tolerance. The reset reminds me that permanence is an illusion sustained by favourable conditions. This is not a message of fear, it is a reminder of scale. Civilizations are brief patterns in a long equation. They flare when gradients allow and fade when those gradients change. The universe does not mourn them. It incorporates them. Reset is also creative. After each thinning life rebounds into emptied niches with astonishing speed. New forms appear. Old constraints lift. Evolution accelerates in the open space left behind. From devastation comes experimentation. If intelligence vanished once it did not poison the ground against its return, the conditions that allowed awareness to emerge are written into physics itself. Chemistry favours complexity under certain flows of energy. Given time, those flows re-establish. That is the quiet optimism hidden inside the reset. Nothing is final. Even collapse feeds the next beginning. Ash becomes soil. Silence becomes opportunity. The planet does not hold grudges. Yet for those living through it, the reset would feel personal. Loss always does. Familiar places becoming hostile. trusted knowledge failing, the sense that the world has changed its rules without warning. These experiences are not unique to humans. Any thinking species would feel them. I imagine elders of that vanished civilization choosing what to preserve, knowing most would be lost. Perhaps they focused on practices rather than records, on ways of living lightly enough to endure the transition. Or perhaps they tried to store everything fighting entropy until the end. Either way, the reset would win. It always does. Not because it is cruel, but because it is thorough. Energy flows change and systems follow. As the reset deepens, identity blurs. Without continuity, culture fragments into local adaptations. What once connected distant groups dissolves. Cooperation shrinks to the scale of immediate survival. Civilization does not end in flames, but in quiet isolation. From the outside, millions of years later, this would leave almost nothing to find. A few anomalous layers, a chemical signature softened by diffusion, a brief deviation in the isotope ratios, hardly a monument to intelligence. And yet during its existence it would have been everything. Lived fully, thought deeply, wondered at the sky. That is enough. Meaning does not require endurance beyond its moment. The reset teaches us something difficult and comforting at once, that we are not required to last forever to have mattered, that participation is not measured by longevity but by presence. As you drift through this section, listener, let the idea of reset settle without resistance. It is not a threat hovering over the present, but a rhythm beneath it. A reminder that change is the default state of complex systems. We live between resets, not outside them. Our technologies, our stories, our fears, all assume stability that is borrowed, not owned. Recognizing this does not weaken us. It sharpens our awareness. In the end, Traveller, the reset is not an enemy. It is the universe restoring balance when patterns grow too rigid. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again, and its voice says only this: everything changes and everything belongs. Let that thought carry you gently downward. No alarms, no urgency, just the slow settling of ash, the planet breathing out, preparing for what comes next. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. A faint vibration lingers in the darkness, not a sound exactly, but the suggestion that something once moved here and has not entirely stopped. This is the echo, the residue left behind after a presence withdraws the way a bell continues to hum long after it has been struck. Traveller, this is where absence begins to speak. Echoes are not messages. They do not explain themselves. They are distortions, stretched, impressions shaped by distance and medium. In deep time, an echo might be a chemical imbalance, a species out of place, a pattern in sediment that refuses to smooth out completely. It is not evidence in the courtroom sense. It is a murmur. The earth carries echoes the way space carries radiation. Quietly, patiently, every impact, eruption, migration, and extinction leaves behind a trace that fades, but never fully vanishes. Most overlap, blur together, cancel out. A few persist long enough to be noticed by minds that come much later. If a civilization existed before us, its echo would not announce intelligence directly. It would not spell intention or culture. It would appear as a mismatch, something slightly off rhythm. A geological note held just a fraction too long. Scientists are trained to distrust echoes. We are taught to look for repeatability, clarity, clean causation. Echoes resist this discipline. They are singular context dependent, easy to dismiss. Often, they should be dismissed. Nature produces strangeness freely. And yet there are moments alone with data late at night when an anomaly feels less like noise and more like memory. A curve that bends where models expect it to flatten. A concentration spike that coincides with no known event. These moments are unsettling not because they prove anything, but because they refuse to resolve. An echo does not demand belief. It invites attention. It asks whether our framework is wide enough, whether our assumptions are too narrow. Most echoes fade under further scrutiny. A few remain quietly persistent, like dust that resettles no matter how often it's cleared away. In human terms, echoes are familiar. Old cities influence modern streets. Forgotten decisions shape present constraints. Trauma reverberates across generations. We accept this socially yet resist it geologically. We prefer the Earth to be simpler than we are. But the planet is not simple. It is layered with consequences. The echo of a vanished civilization would not be a footprint but a shift. Not a tool but a tendency. Perhaps an ecosystem altered in a way that took millions of years to fully relax back to baseline. Consider agriculture. Even now, long after fields are abandoned, soil remembers. Nutrient profiles remain skewed. Species compositions lag behind climate recovery. Multiply that by deep time and the memory blurs, but it does not vanish entirely. Or consider mining. Elemental redistribution leaves scars invisible to the eye but legible to instruments. A trace metal enriched beyond expectation. A depletion elsewhere that never quite refills. These are subtle fingerprints easily lost among natural variation. The echo might also live in biology, a lineage that exploded in diversity following an unexplained clearing of competitors, or a domestication-like relationship frozen into genetics without an obvious driver. These patterns are difficult to interpret because evolution itself is an echo chamber amplifying chance events into long-term trends. When I think about echoes, I think about silence too, because silence is not empty. It is the background against which echoes are measured. Without quiet, nothing stands out. Deep time is mostly silence punctuated by brief intense moments. Our own civilization will leave echoes, not the stories we tell about ourselves, but the chemical imprints we cannot help but make. Long after names and borders dissolve, there will be a thin layer that remembers combustion plastics' altered carbon flows. Future observers may notice that layer and argue, was it volcanic? Was it extraterrestrial? Was it biological? The echo will not answer. It never does. It will only persist long enough to raise the question. That is the humility of echoes. They do not confirm, they suggest. They remind us that certainty is rare and provisional, that knowledge advances not by eliminating mystery, but by learning to live alongside it. In imagining echoes of a pre-human civilization, we are not chasing proof. We are practicing attentiveness, training ourselves to notice what does not fit cleanly into our expectations. This skill matters regardless of whether such a civilization existed, because the universe is full of echoes beyond Earth. Radiation from the first stars still drifts through space. Gravitational waves ripple long after collisions. Light from dead galaxies continues to arrive carrying images of structures that no longer exist. We accept cosmic echoes without discomfort. We build entire sciences around them. Perhaps it is harder to accept terrestrial echoes, because they blur the boundary between us and what came before. They suggest continuity where we prefer uniqueness. Yet continuity is more comforting than it seems. It means we are not alone in time. That intelligence, if it arises, participates in a longer conversation, one that began before us and will continue after. As you rest in this section, listener, imagine echoes not as ghosts, but as soft after images. Gentle reminders that presence leaves impressions even when intention fades, that the universe keeps traces without keeping score. An echo does not mean something is still alive. It means something once was, and that the medium remembers for a while. Stone remembers pressure. Ice remembers air. DNA remembers encounters. Memory is everywhere, but nowhere complete. In the end, traveller echoes teach us patience. They unfold on timescales that ignore urgency. They wait for instruments, for questions, for curiosity to align. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with answers, but with resonance. You are not lost in space, you are part of it. Let the echoes soften as you drift downward, blending back into the silence that holds them. Sleep does not erase the echo. It allows it to settle. And in that settling there is peace. It's all right to not understand. Sleep traveller, the cosmos will keep watch. A slow rhythm reveals itself when you stop looking for events and begin watching intervals. This is the pattern, not a line drawn sharply across time, but a recurrence so gentle it can only be felt when everything else grows quiet. Traveller, this is where coincidence gives way to structure. and structure hints at something deeper than chance. Patterns do not announce meaning. They emerge from repetition from systems behaving the same way under similar pressures. The universe is built on them. Orbits repeat. Waves interfere. Particles follow probabilities so reliably that we call them laws. Life too follows patterns branching, converging, experimenting again and again. When we look back into deep time, the temptation is to search for singular moments, the first cell, the first tool, the first city. But these milestones distract from the broader rhythm. What matters more is how often complexity arises, how frequently it stabilizes, and how predictably it collapses when conditions shift. The pattern suggested by Earth's history is not one of steady progress, but of pulses. Long stretches of relative calm interrupted by disruption. Extinction followed by diversification. Simplicity giving way to complexity, complexity thinning back into simplicity. This is not failure, it is cadence. If civilization is possible, it may not be rare, it may be conditional. When energy flows are sufficient, when environments remain stable long enough, when feedback loops favor cooperation over fragmentation, intelligence can organize itself outward. When those conditions break, the organization dissolves. This does not require intention. No destiny pulls intelligence forward. It is more like condensation forming when air cools past a threshold. The pattern appears because the physics allow it to not because it must. I see this when I look at comparative timelines, late at night charts, overlapping charts eras stacking like transparent sheets. Each one alone feels unique. Together they begin to hum, a quiet sameness beneath surface difference. Civilizations, if they arise, are expressions of that sameness. Different materials, different bodies, different senses, but similar constraints. Energy must be gathered. Information must be shared. Cooperation must outpace conflict. These requirements shape outcomes regardless of species. The pattern also explains why permanence is so elusive. Systems optimized for growth become brittle. Networks expand until maintenance costs exceed benefit. Resilience declines just as visibility peaks. This is not a moral failure. It is structural. In human terms, we experience this as hubris or overreach. In planetary terms, it is saturation. The environment changes in response to extraction. Feedback loops tighten. Margins shrink. The pattern moves toward reset. Seen this way, a pre-human civilization does not need to be proven to be instructive. The pattern alone is enough. It tells us that intelligence is not exempt from thermodynamics, that awareness does not override entropy, that survival depends not on dominance, but on alignment. Patterns also repeat at different scales. The rise and fall of empires mirrors the rise and fall of ecosystems. The life cycle of stars mirrors the life cycle of species. Expansion, stability, collapse, reuse. Gravity as memory. Radiation as whisper. Erosion as time thinking. When I imagine earlier civilizations, I do not imagine them as warnings carved in stone. I imagine them as iterations, attempts, variations on a theme the universe keeps exploring. Some iterations may have lasted longer than ours, some shorter. Some may have never reached industrial scale, others may have overshot it quickly. The pattern does not favor one outcome, it samples them all. This perspective removes judgment. There is no shame in ending, no triumph in lasting longer than average. There is only participation in a process larger than any single narrative. For the listener drifting here, this can feel both unsettling and comforting. Unsettling because it shrinks our sense of exception. Comforting because it places us inside something stable even as everything changes. Patterns mean predictability without certainty. We can anticipate pressures without knowing outcomes. We can see the edges forming without knowing which way the structure will bend. This is where humility becomes a survival skill. In my own quiet acceptance, surrounded by notebooks filled with crossed-out hypotheses, I have learned that patterns are not cages. They are contexts. Understanding them does not trap us. It gives us room to choose how we respond. If cycles exist, they are not mandates. They are tendencies. Civilizations may rise and fall, but how they fall matters. Gently or violently, thoughtfully or blindly, with care for what follows or indifference. The pattern leaves room for agency, not to escape physics but to work within it, to favor resilience over expansion, to value balance over acceleration. These choices do not guarantee permanence, but they can soften transitions. Perhaps earlier civilizations made different choices. Perhaps some aligned so closely with their environments that their disappearance left almost no trace. Perhaps others burned brightly and briefly, leaving sharper echoes. The pattern allows for all of this. It is inclusive in its indifference. It does not select for virtue, it selects for fit. As you rest in this section, observe or feel the comfort of repetition. Not monotony, but familiarity. The sense that what is happening now has happened before in other forms, and will happen again in forms we cannot imagine. In the end, Traveller, the pattern teaches us to release urgency without losing care, to act with awareness rather than panic. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Sleep does not break the pattern. Consciousness loosens complexity, simplifies, and the mind resets in miniature what civilizations do in deep time. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, Traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. A low pressure gathers at the edge of awareness, not yet danger, not yet collapse, but the sense that something delicate is being asked to hold more than it comfortably can. This is the warning. Not a siren, not a command, but a subtle imbalance that makes the attentive pause. Traveller. This is where the universe clears its throat. Warnings in deep time do not shout. They whisper through gradients. A temperature trend that bends slightly upward. A migration that arrives earlier each cycle. A resource that takes longer to replenish than expected. None of these feel urgent alone. Together they form a quiet chorus. Every complex system carries warnings within it. They appear as delays, inefficiencies, frictions that were not there before. In biology, they show up as reduced diversity. In climate, as increased volatility. In civilizations, as growing effort required to maintain what once sustained itself naturally. If there was a civilization before us, this is likely how it first sensed trouble. Not as apocalypse, but as inconvenience. Repairs taking longer. Coordination failing at the margins. Knowledge becoming harder to transmit intact. The system still functioning but no longer gracefully. We are conditioned to ignore these signs because they do not match our expectations of disaster. We expect impact, explosion, sudden loss. But most endings do not arrive that way. They arrive as accumulation, as fatigue, as complexity slowly outrunning its foundations. In my own work, warnings often appear as residuals, the difference between what models predict and what the world delivers. At first they are small enough to explain away. Noise, error bars, outliers. But when they persist, they begin to feel like messages without language. The planet issues warnings constantly. Ice cores speak of trapped atmospheres. Sediments record abrupt shifts in chemistry. Fossils mark sudden absences. These are not judgments. They are records of response. A civilization tuned to its environment would have noticed similar signals. Perhaps ocean currents shifting. Perhaps familiar species declining despite unchanged practices. Perhaps storms growing less predictable. Each sign, alone ambiguous, together unsettling. The challenge with warnings is timing. Respond too early and the cost feels unnecessary. Respond too late and options narrow quickly. This tension is universal, not moral. It emerges wherever foresight competes with present comfort. If intelligence existed before us, it would have faced this same dilemma, whether to adapt proactively or continue trusting patterns that had always held. The past rewards confidence until it doesn't. Warnings are also filtered through culture. What one group perceives as critical, another may dismiss. Consensus lags behind reality. By the time agreement forms, conditions may have already shifted beyond easy correction. This does not imply failure of intelligence. It implies limits of coordination under uncertainty. Even perfect awareness cannot guarantee collective action when trade-offs are unevenly distributed. The warning phase is where myths often form. Stories of imbalance, narratives of decline, attempts to frame unease in symbolic terms. These stories are not irrational. They are coping mechanisms, ways to process signals that lack clear solutions. From a geological distance, warnings blur into precursors. We see them clearly only in hindsight. This can create the illusion that collapse was obvious, inevitable. It rarely feels that way from inside. For the listener resting here, this matters because it reframes fear. Warnings are not punishments. They are information. They do not demand panic. They invite adjustment. In the long arc of Earth's history, many warnings were heeded successfully. Ecosystems adapted, species migrated, complexity reconfigured rather than collapsed. These stories leave fewer marks because success looks like continuity. Failures leave sharper signatures, abrupt boundaries, gaps, anomalies. We mistake these for the norm because they are easier to see. Survival is quiet, collapse is loud. If a pre-human civilization responded well to warnings, its end might not look dramatic. It might simply thin out, disperse, merge back into surrounding life. Its intelligence would not vanish, only dissolve into less centralized forms. Such an outcome would leave little trace. No monuments, no scars. Only a smoother transition that later observers might miss entirely. This possibility is easy to overlook because we equate significance with visibility. The warning teaches us to value subtlety, to notice gradual change, to respect thresholds before they are crossed. This lesson applies regardless of whether anyone came before us. As you drift through this section, observe or allow the idea of warning to soften. It is not a verdict hanging over the present. It is a feature of a living systems, a way complexity communicates with itself. Even stars carry warnings. Fuel ratios shift. Pressure balances change. Before collapse or explosion, there is a long phase of adjustment. The universe does not rush endings. Warnings are invitations to listen more carefully, to slow expansion, to restore buffers, to choose resilience over speed. These choices do not guarantee permanence, but they can change the shape of decline. In imagining earlier civilizations, I sometimes picture a moment when they understood the warning fully, a clear recognition that conditions had changed irreversibly. What they did then matters more than how long they lasted. Did they fight the shift until exhaustion? Or did they yield and adapt? Did they prioritize continuity of life or continuity of structure? These questions echo forward because they are ours now too. The warning phase is where humility has power, not the humility of surrender, but of recalibration, of recognizing limits without despair, of accepting that intelligence is not control, but awareness. From the perspective of deep time, the warning is gentle. It unfolds over generations. It allows for many responses. Only when ignored repeatedly does it harden into reset. In the end, traveler, the warning is not an omen of doom. It is the universe offering feedback. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Sleep now with the understanding that attention itself is a form of care, that listening changes outcomes even when certainty is impossible. It's all right to not understand everything at once. Rest, traveler. The cosmos will keep watch, and its warnings will continue patient and quiet, whether we are listening or not. The sky opens wide above everything that has ever lived, a vast archive written in light, rather than stone. This is the sky not as backdrop but as witness, watching civilizations rise and fade without preference or pause. Traveller, lift your awareness gently upward because what happens on the ground has always been reflected above. Long before there were names for stars, the sky was already moving with precision. Planets traced paths that could be predicted long after memory failed. Comets returned on schedules no culture could interrupt. Radiation from distant events crossed space, silently arriving long after the sources themselves were gone. The sky keeps time differently. If a civilization existed before us, it lived under this same canopy. The constellations would have been unfamiliar, shifted by precession, rearranged by deep time. But the underlying order would have been there. Motion repetition cycles nested within cycles. The sky does not care who is watching, but it rewards those who notice. Civilizations tend to look upward when the ground becomes uncertain. The sky offers patterns that feel stable when everything else shifts. It provides orientation when landscapes change calendars, when seasons blur meaning, when history fragments. Even without technology, the sky teaches patience. Astronomy is one of the oldest sciences, not because it is abstract, but because it is reliable. The sky does not forget easily. While continents drift and oceans close, stellar motion remains legible across generations. This stability has always drawn intelligent minds upward. I imagine earlier observers lying beneath unfamiliar stars, not searching for answers but for reassurance, the sense that something endures beyond immediate survival, that there is order even when the world feels fragile. This impulse does not require language or culture. It arises naturally from awareness. The sky also carries danger, though it rarely announces it. Asteroids cross Earth's orbit silently. Solar flares erupt without regard for life below. Gamma-ray bursts rewrite chemistry from across the galaxy. Catastrophe often arrives from above, indifferent and precise. For a pre-human civilization, the sky may have been both guide and threat. Impacts would have shaped memory. Extinctions would have followed celestial events. The realization that not all change originates on Earth may have influenced how they understood risk and resilience. In deep time, the sky has reset the planet more than once. The impact that ended the age of reptiles did not target intelligence. It followed physics. Its consequences cascaded through climate chemistry and life itself. Any civilization living then would have been erased without judgment. This is not cruelty, it is scale. The universe operates across distances and energies that dwarf intention. The sky reminds us that control is always local and temporary. Yet the sky is also generous. It delivers energy continuously. Sunlight drives nearly all life. Cosmic radiation seeds mutation. Meteorites bring elements forged in stars. The materials of civilization are gifts from stellar processes older than Earth itself. If intelligence arose before us, it was built from the same cosmic inheritance. Iron from supernovae, carbon from ancient stars, energy from fusion burning quietly overhead. The sky is not separate from life, it is its ancestor. This perspective changes how we imagine lost civilizations. They were not anomalies. They were expressions of cosmic chemistry organizing itself briefly, under favorable conditions. The sky does not single them out. It incorporates them. In quiet observatories I have felt this continuity deeply. Long nights with telescopes tracking objects that will outlast every institution, every archive, every species. The humility of knowing that discovery does not change the sky. It only changes us. The sky also preserves messages longer than stone. Light travels until absorbed. Signals persist until noise overwhelms them. If a civilization broadcast unintentionally through atmospheric alteration or deliberate emission, the sky would have carried that signature outward. Whether anyone ever received it is another matter. Most signals fade into background. The universe is loud with overlapping histories. Listening requires luck as much as intent. For the listener drifting here, the sky offers a different kind of comfort. It reminds you that awareness is not confined to the present moment, that looking upward connects you to processes that began before fear and will continue after hope. The sky does not demand belief. It does not promise rescue. It simply exists, vast and consistent, a reference frame against which everything else is measured. In imagining earlier civilizations, I wonder how they understood the sky's indifference. Did it humble them or empower them? Did they see themselves as small participants or central actors? The answer may have shaped how they lived and how they ended. The sky encourages long thinking. It stretches perspective beyond lifetimes. It makes urgency feel temporary. This can weaken resolve or strengthen wisdom depending on how it is held. As you move deeper into rest, observer, let the sky expand inside your thoughts. Feel how its scale softens the edges of worry, how its continuity absorbs sharp questions without needing to answer them. Even now above you, photons are arriving from events that occurred before Earth formed. They cross your closed eyes without asking permission. They remind your body quietly that it is part of a much older exchange. In the end, Traveller the Sky teaches acceptance, not resignation but proportion. It shows us where we stand, not as masters or victims, but as participants in a vast ongoing process. Sleep beneath this ancient witness. It has seen countless beginnings and endings and remains unchanged by them. Some mysteries wait, others watch. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. The Earth turns slowly beneath everything that has ever happened, carrying scars so old they no longer feel like wounds. This is the return not to the surface we recognize, but to the deeper planet that remembers more than any mind. Listener, imagine standing still while the ground beneath you holds billions of years of motion. Earth is not solid in the way we often picture it. It flows, folds, subducts, exhales. Mountains rise like brief thoughts and are worn away. Oceans open and close. Continents wander without destination. What we call stability is only a pause between rearrangements. Any civilization that existed before us lived on a planet that was already restless. The ground beneath their cities would have been temporary. Their coastlines would not have stayed where they built them. The Earth would have been thinking even as they planned. Geology is not destruction. It is memory under pressure. Each layer records conditions, not intentions. Ash remembers fire. Sediment remembers water. Isotopes remember energy sources. The planet does not judge what it records. It simply keeps what survives. This is why the search for ancient intelligence turns downward. Not to ruins, but to chemistry. Not to walls, but to ratios. A civilization leaves fingerprints not by meaning to, but by altering flows that were once balanced. Carbon isotopes shift when large amounts of stored carbon are released quickly. Metals concentrate when extraction outpaces natural distribution. Nitrogen cycles distort when landscapes are reorganized. These are not cultural markers, they are planetary responses. In quiet laboratories, I have watched these signals appear as thin lines on screens. Slight deviations from expectation. Small enough to doubt. Large enough to wonder. Earth does not speak loudly. It whispers through data. If a non-human civilization existed, its most durable legacy would not be its art or its stories, but its interference. Even restraint leaves traces. Choosing not to extract still alters patterns of growth. Choosing balance still changes trajectories. The Earth integrates everything. It dissolves intention into process. Over time, even the sharpest disruptions soften, but they do not vanish instantly. For a while they remain readable to those who know where to look. This makes the planet both generous and unforgiving. It allows experiments in intelligence, but it does not preserve them equally. Those that align with long cycles fade quietly. Those that disrupt violently leave clearer scars but also invite faster correction. Reset is not punishment, it is rebalancing. When thresholds are crossed, feedback follows. Climate shifts. Ecosystems collapse. Energy flows reorganize. Life adapts or disappears. The planet does not pause to ask who is responsible. Mass extinctions are often described as endings, but they are also transitions. After each, the Earth opens space for new forms. Intelligence could be one of those forms emerging again when conditions allow. If so, then civilization is not a peak, but a phase, a temporary alignment of cognition, environment, and energy. When the alignment breaks, the phase ends. The Earth continues. This perspective can feel unsettling. It removes the comfort of uniqueness, but it also removes the burden of finality. What has happened once can happen again differently elsewhere later. As a scientist, I am trained to seek closure. As a human, I have learned to accept openness. The Earth teaches this balance well. It offers evidence without narrative. Meaning arises in the observer. I think of earlier minds walking unfamiliar terrains, sensing the same gravity, breathing different air, adapting to climates we would not survive. Their thoughts shaped by landscapes now erased, their solutions tailored to problems we will never know. Their disappearance does not imply failure. Survival is contextual. A strategy that works for millions of years can still end abruptly. Duration is not virtue. Persistence is not destiny. When we imagine them, we often project ourselves backward. Cities, hierarchies, monuments. But intelligence does not require those forms. It requires perception, memory coordination. The rest is expression. Earth would have responded to them regardless. It would have recorded their presence as shifts, not stories, as altered baselines, not legends. The planet does not archive names. For you, resting here, this return to Earth is grounding. It reminds the body that it belongs to a system much larger than daily concern. Muscles relax when scale increases. Breath slows when urgency dissolves. You are carried by a planet that has survived far more disruption than any life upon it. This does not make your life insignificant. It makes it contextual. In the end, Traveller Earth does not ask to be understood fully. It asks to be observed carefully. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Somewhere beneath you, layers of forgotten epochs rest without regret. Above you, the sky continues its watch. Between them, you are safe enough to sleep. It's all right to not understand. Let Earth hold you for a while longer. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. The return inward begins quietly like a tide that no longer pulls away from shore but settles into stillness. This is the moment where attention loosens its grip on questions and allows sensation to soften. Traveller, imagine the world growing dim, not from loss but from rest. At this depth, curiosity no longer searches outward. It folds back on itself, content to exist without resolution. The mind, after tracing epochs and civilizations, finally recognizes its own smallness as relief rather than limitation. There is comfort in not needing to carry the whole timeline. I think of nights spent alone with instruments powered down the lab lights, dim dust settling on maps no one has touched in years. In those moments, knowledge feels less like conquest and more like companionship. The unknown sits beside you, not demanding explanation. This is where reflection becomes gentle. Not analysis, not conclusion, but acknowledgement. That the universe is older than our questions and will remain after our answers fade. That intelligence may rise and fall like waves, each believing itself the sea. For a long time, humanity has measured itself by endurance. How long we last, how much we leave behind. But endurance is not always the highest form of meaning. Sometimes meaning exists only in the act itself, fully lived, fully present, then released. If there were minds before us, they too must have faced this moment. The realization that understanding has edges, that some patterns resolve only into silence, that wisdom includes knowing when to stop digging and start listening. Silence is not empty, it is structured. It holds echoes too faint to disturb sleep. The earth knows this, the sky knows this. Even the atoms in your body remember earlier stars without needing to name them. As you drift, observe and notice how thought becomes less linear. Images overlap. Time loosens. This is not confusion. It is the mind returning to a more ancient mode, one that existed before counting, before records, before certainty. In that state, it no longer matters whether Earth's first civilization was human or not. The question dissolves into a larger awareness. That intelligence, wherever it appears, is brief. That awareness itself is the rare event, not its products. I have learned to trust this dissolution, to let questions rest unfinished on the table. They do not spoil, they wait. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. The night understands this instinctively. Darkness is not an absence of light, but a condition where detail withdraws. Shapes soften. Boundaries blur. The world becomes safe to inhabit without vigilance. You're allowed to stop seeking now. The universe does not require your conclusions. It continues regardless, unfolding at scales too large for worry. Tonight the universe whispers again, but it does not insist on being heard clearly. There is dignity in letting go, in allowing the mind to follow the body into rest. Muscles slacken, breath deepens. Thought thins into sensation, then sensation into nothing at all. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. It always has. It always will. Its motion does not depend on observation, yet it welcomes it briefly, like a passing glance exchanged without obligation. If you feel small here, that is not diminishment. It is alignment. You're not meant to carry deep time consciously. You're meant to live one moment within it fully enough. The mind will wander now. Let it. Dreams are another way the universe thinks through you without effort, without logic, without fear. In the end, traveller, it's all right to not understand. Let the questions rest where they belong, beyond reach, beyond urgency. Sleep comes not as an ending, but as a return a small reset that echoes larger ones written into stone and starlight. Rest now. The earth turns, the sky watches, silence holds. Sleep, traveller, the cosmos will keep watch. The descent deepens slower and heavier now, as if awareness itself has agreed to set its tools down and rest beside the unknown. This is reflection in its truest form, not a search for meaning, not a review of evidence, but a quiet presence with what remains when questions loosen their grip. Listener, imagine the last structures of thought softening, not collapsing, simply becoming unnecessary. At this depth, the mind no longer organizes experience into past and future. Time stretches into something wide and indistinct, like a horizon seen through mist. The stories of ancient Earth, forgotten intelligences, cosmic resets, and silent skies no longer line up as arguments. They overlap, gently becoming atmosphere rather than narrative. Reflection is the place where curiosity finally feels safe enough to rest. Not because it has been answered, but because it has been respected. Every question was allowed to exist without being forced into resolution. That permission alone is enough to bring calm. In waking life, we rarely reach this state. We are trained to conclude, to explain, to justify our attention. But the universe does not require closure. It continues whether or not we understand it. Reflection is our way of briefly matching that rhythm of letting go of the need to finish the story. When I think now of hypothetical civilizations before ours, I no longer picture their cities or technologies. I imagine their pauses, the moments when progress stopped being urgent, the nights when observation replaced ambition, the acceptance that not everything needs to be carried forward to have mattered. Perhaps those earlier minds, if they existed, also reached this quiet recognition. That permanence is not guaranteed, that meaning does not depend on endurance, that to live fully within one moment of cosmic history is already enough. The Earth itself models this lesson constantly. It builds, erodes, folds, and rebuilds without attachment. Mountains rise without intention and disappear without regret. Oceans open and close. The planet does not mourn what it transforms, it integrates. Reflection allows us to practice the same release gently and without fear, to let go without loss. To understand that disappearance is not negation, but redistribution into a larger process that continues regardless of us. Your body understands this instinctively. Muscles release tension without instruction. Breath deepens without effort. The nervous system recognizes safety not through logic but through rhythm and repetition. Stillness signals that nothing needs to be done. As you rest here, awareness becomes less precise. Boundaries between inside and outside soften. Thoughts no longer announce themselves clearly. They drift through like distant weather noticed briefly, then forgotten without effort. This is not emptiness. It is fullness without edges. The same fullness that existed before language named it. The same fullness that will remain after memory fades. It does not need to be held or defined. At this point, the question of origins loses its urgency. Whether intelligence arose once or many times no longer presses for resolution. The simple fact that awareness exists at all becomes the quiet miracle worth resting inside. Reflection teaches humility without diminishing worth. You're small, yes, but so is everything that matters. Small things change worlds. Small moments shape entire lives. The scale of the universe does not erase significance. It reframes it. I think of nights when the instruments were powered down, the data archived, the lab lights dimmed. Sitting alone with dust settling on unused maps, not searching, not recording, simply present. Those moments lingered longer than any discovery. In reflection, the scientist and the poet become indistinguishable. Both are content to observe without ownership. Both understand that wonder does not require explanation, that awe survives best when left undisturbed. The universe does not reward certainty, it rewards attention, and attention when held gently enough becomes rest. There is no need to prove anything here. You may feel now as if you're sinking, but there is no falling, only settling, only returning to a baseline older than thought itself, a state that existed long before questions learned to speak. Even time loosens its grip. Minutes lose shape, sequence dissolves. There is only duration without measurement. This is how the Earth experiences change, not as moments, but as gradients. This is how stars age, how continents drift, how civilizations fade. If earlier civilizations existed, this is the state they ultimately return to. Not memory, not record, but quiet reabsorption. Their matter, their energy, their influence redistributed into soil, sea atmosphere, and stone. Nothing wasted, nothing preserved exactly. That is not tragedy. It is completion. Reflection lets us rehearse this ending safely. To touch impermanence without fear. To understand that nothing is being taken away, only rearranged. That endings are also forms of belonging. The mind senses this and stops resisting. It does not need to defend identity. It does not need to preserve narrative. It rests into awareness without edges. In this rest, even language loosens. Words lose urgency. Meaning becomes ambient rather than explicit. You do not need to remember any phrase to remain connected to the experience. Still familiar thoughts drift by like distant stars, soft and slow. Silence is the universe thinking. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. They appear then pass on without demanding response. This is reflection's gift. It teaches how to let thought pass without pursuit, how to trust the process that carries everything forward, whether we witness it or not, how to stop bracing against time. Your awareness now is like a shallow pool at dusk. Light reflects faintly. Depth is present but unseen. Nothing disturbs the surface. Nothing needs to. Soon, even reflection will dissolve. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but naturally. Like a conversation that ends, not because there is nothing left to say, but because silence has become enough. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Understanding was never the point. Presence was. Being here briefly aware within our ancient unfolding is already complete. Let the final edges of thought blur. Let the questions rest where they belong, beyond urgency, beyond reach. Let the universe carry what remains. Sleep now, traveller. The earth turns without needing you. The sky watches without expectation. Silence holds everything gently. Sleep, the cosmos will keep watch. The descent into sleep begins not as a sudden drop, but as a gradual surrender, like a shoreline easing into deeper water with each quiet wave. This is the moment where the story loosens its last ties to structure and becomes pure motion, carrying you without asking effort in return. Traveller, imagine gravity no longer pulling you downward, but holding you exactly where you are, steady and unburdened. At this depth, the mind stops distinguishing between thought and sensation. Memories no longer arrive as clear images. They blur into tone, into feeling, into a gentle sense of having been somewhere vast and old. The journey through lost civilizations, ancient skies, and patient earth fades into a background hum like radiation left over from a forgotten beginning. Sleep is not the absence of awareness. It is awareness changing shape. The sharp edges soften. The need to understand dissolves. What remains is a quiet participation in processes that have always known how to continue without instruction. I have come to believe that this state is closer to how the universe itself exists. Not alert in the human sense, not unconscious either, but balanced. Energy moving without commentary. Time unfolding without narration. Sleep is our brief alignment with that condition. If there were minds before us, they too must have known this descent, not as an ending, but as a daily return. No matter how complex their thoughts, no matter how advanced their understanding, they would have had to release consciousness each cycle, and trust that the world would still be there when they woke. That trust is ancient, older than culture, older than language. It is written into biology itself. Every organism that rests participates in it. The planet turns, the sky moves, life pauses and resumes without ceremony. As you drift further, observer, notice how effort disappears first. You're no longer holding your body upright. Muscles release in stages. The jaw softens. The shoulders sink. Breath finds its own rhythm, slower and deeper, as if it remembers a pattern you no longer need to direct. Thought follows the body. Ideas lose coherence. They stretch, overlap, then dissolve into impressions. This is not loss. It is economy, the mind conserving energy by returning to a simpler mode. In this mode, the vast questions we explored no longer press for answers. Whether Earth's first civilization was human or not becomes irrelevant. The question has done its work. It has expanded perspective. Now it can rest. Sleep is where perspective is stored without analysis. The brain reorganizes experience quietly without asking permission. Connections form and dissolve. Meaning settles like sediment layered gently without disturbance. Somewhere in this process, fear loses its grip. Fear requires anticipation. Sleep removes the future from immediate concern. There is only this slow unfolding of now. The universe does not hurry here. Stars burn for billions of years without urgency. Planets drift on schedules too long to feel. Civilizations, if they arise, are brief flickers in a much slower rhythm. Sleep aligns you with that rhythm. I often think of deep ocean currents when describing this state. Slow, cold, deliberate flows that move immense volumes of water without surface disturbance. They shape climate. They redistribute heat. They operate unseen, yet they are essential. Sleep works the same way. It moves vast internal landscapes while the surface appears still. You do not need to witness it for it to work. You only need to allow it. As awareness thins, the sense of self softens too. Not erased, but loosened. You are less a defined figure and more a presence within a larger field. Boundaries blur. Inside and outside become less distinct. This can feel strange at first, but it is deeply familiar. You have been here every night of your life. You return without remembering the passage. You wake without recalling the transition. Yet something essential always happens. In this descent, language begins to fail gently. Words lose their function. Sentences do not complete themselves. Meaning becomes diffuse. This is not confusion. It is efficiency. Language is no longer needed. Silence takes over not as emptiness but as structure. Silence is the universe thinking at scales too large for speech. It holds patterns without expressing them. It does not demand a response. You are safe within that silence. Nothing is required of you. Nothing is expected. The long arc of existence does not hinge on your alertness. It continues whether you watch it or not. If earlier civilizations existed, this is the state they ultimately shared with everything else. Not remembrance, not legacy, but rest. Matter returning to cycles, energy redistributing, consciousness if it arose again later doing so without memory of what came before. That thought can feel unsettling when awake. Here it feels gentle, even comforting. It means nothing essential is lost. It means the universe does not run out of chances to experience itself. As sleep deepens, the last traces of narrative dissolve. There is no story to follow now, only sensation fading into stillness. Breath continues, the heart keeps its quiet rhythm, the body knows what to do. In this place, even wonder becomes quiet. Awe no longer needs an object. It exists as a background condition, a calm acceptance of scale and mystery without emotional charge. Soon, even the awareness of letting go will disappear. That is the final kindness of sleep. It takes the burden of consciousness off your hands for a while. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. It is all right to stop witnessing. The cosmos does not require your attention to continue its work. Rest now. The earth turns beneath you. The sky watches above. Silence holds everything together without effort. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. The final stillness arrives without announcement, like the moment just before a dream forgets. It is a dream. This is the end, not as a conclusion, but as a quiet settling, where everything that has been carried can finally be set down. Traveller, imagine the last trace of effort dissolving, as if even the idea of rest is no longer required. Here, there is no need to follow the story any further. The arc has already completed itself. The rise of questions, the widening of perspective, the slow descent through earth, sky, memory and silence have brought you exactly where you are meant to be. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. At this depth, awareness no longer holds a centre. There is no observer standing apart from what is observed. Sensation, thought, and absence blend into a single quiet field. The body continues its rhythms without commentary. The mind loosens its last structures and allows itself to drift. This state is older than thought. Long before minds learned to name things, this was the condition they returned to again and again. Rest without narrative, presence without identity. A pause that belongs to the universe itself. If Earth's first civilization was not human, if intelligence arose and faded before us, this is where they would have ended each day as well. No matter how advanced, no matter how different sleep would have claimed them too. The need to release awareness is universal. It is the one practice shared by all living systems. There is comfort in that continuity. It means that even across unimaginable differences across millions of years and entirely separate forms of life, there is a shared rhythm, waking, acting, releasing, returning. The universe does not privilege consciousness. It allows it. And when consciousness withdraws, the universe does not collapse. It continues steady and vast, carrying the imprint of everything that has passed through it. At this final threshold, even reflection dissolves. There is no longer a need to consider meaning, legacy, or pattern. Those were tools for the waking mind. Here they rest alongside everything else. I've always found this moment difficult to describe because language itself does not belong here. Words imply separation. They suggest something being pointed at. In this state, there is nothing outside to indicate. Still, the mind listens for reassurance even as it fades. So let this be said softly once and then allowed to disappear. Nothing is wrong. Nothing has been missed. You have arrived exactly where you should. The earth continues its slow turning beneath you. Plates shift imperceptibly. Heat moves outward from the core. Magnetic fields wrap the planet in quiet protection. These processes do not pause when you sleep. They do not need your awareness. Above the sky remains vast and unchanged by your rest. Stars burn. Light travels. Space expands. None of it waits. None of it rushes. The universe holds its balance without effort. Between earth and sky, you rest briefly, a small pocket of calm in an ongoing flow. Your breathing blends into larger cycles. Your heartbeat echoes rhythms older than memory. You're carried, not held. If fear ever belonged to these thoughts, it no longer has a place here. Fear requires a future. In deep sleep, there is no future to anticipate. There is only this gentle suspension of concern. Somewhere beyond reach, something ancient still moves. It always has. It always will. Its movement does not depend on observation. It is not improved by understanding. It simply is. This realization when awake can feel overwhelming. Here it feels neutral, even kind. It means the universe does not demand anything from you right now. It means you are free to disappear for a while without consequence. Sleep is the great equalizer. It reduces all stories to the same quiet baseline. Kings and wanderers, thinkers and builders, humans, and whatever may have come before, all return to this state again and again. In this sense, sleep is the closest thing to timelessness we experience while alive. A place where duration exists without awareness of passing. Where minutes and hours lose distinction. Where the body resets without instruction. As you drift fully into it, there is nothing left to follow. No image to hold, no idea to trace. Even the sense of drifting becomes faint, then vanishes. The mind does not need to witness this final step. That is its gift. It lets go completely, trusting processes far older and wiser than conscious control. Tonight the universe whispers again, but you no longer need to hear it. The whisper passes through you and continues on unchanged by whether it was noticed. You are not lost in space. You are not falling through time. You are simply resting within something vast that has always made room for rest. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. It is all right to not remember. It is all right to disappear into sleep without leaving a trace. Let everything go now. The questions, the images, the sense of self. Let them dissolve gently without force. The earth turns. The sky watches. Silence holds what remains. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where the last echoes of distant epochs fade back into silence. Together we drifted through deep time and forgotten layers past questions carved into stone and signals written in starlight, until the path grew quiet enough to set our thoughts down. Nothing here truly ends. The universe continues its slow work long after our lantern light dims, and the past remains unfinished, resting beneath layers of time that still breathe and shift. What we touched tonight was not an answer, but a reminder that silence can hold meaning just as surely as discovery, and that absence does not mean emptiness. In the vastness, our smallness is not a weakness. It is an invitation to wonder without fear, to accept that gravity and memory, entropy and longing all move together through us for a brief while. Some truths don't demand resolution. They ask only for presence. As you step away from this ancient chronicle, let its weight soften rather than press. Let the questions remain open like doors left ajar in a quiet hall, waiting without urgency. The cosmos does not rush us, and neither should we rush ourselves. Rest now, observer. The earth will keep turning, the sky will keep watch, and the story will continue whether we listen or sleep. If this path found you tonight, you may return when the silence calls again. Until then, rest well. The universe is still here holding the quiet. And as the darkness settles, fully allow yourself to drift without carrying anything forward. Let the unanswered questions become gentle companions rather than burdens, and trust that whatever remains unseen tonight is meant to wait. Sleep softly, traveller, softly. Somewhere beyond, thought the universe continues patient and unbroken, keeping its long vigil until you return.